Who is Minnie the Minx? The uncouth amongst us would say she is merely Dennis in a skirt. Maybe that's how it started, but she ended up being something so much more. For example, she also wears a beret. Today we are going to delve into the history and, dare I say, lore of this British icon who frankly doesn't get her diddly do. Except for that nice statue, but she needs more. She needs more do, and that's what I'm here to do today. Part 1. Leo Baxendale. The year is 1953. Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay accomplished the first successful ascent of Mount Everest. Color television hits the scene as well as James Bond, and interestingly, the Playboy magazine is delighting people across the nation. But all those things pale in comparison to the debut of Britain's naughtiest girl, Minnie the Minx. She was created by legendary Beano artist Leo Baxendale, who you may remember as the creator of the Bash Street Kids. Leo was still young and wide-eyed, 1 year into his Beano run, and was greatly inspired by the real Dennis the Menace, not that American knockoff. He had sent samples of his work to the Dundee headquarters in 1952, and before he knew it, he was working on his own weekly strip. A strip, I don't know if you've heard of it, it was a Little Plum. That's right, and Plum was such a success, the gaffers in Dundee wanted Mr. Leo to get to work on a second strip. So what did he have in store for us? Well, let's find out. Part 2. Creating a Minx. The Beano editor at the time, George Mooneyboy Mooney, wanted to keep going with their growing anti-authority edge and do something similar to Dennis, who was far and away the most popular character at the time. Leo, being a bit of a Dennis fanboy, was happy to go along with Mooneyboy's proposal for a girl version of Dennis the Menace. In the mini 65 Years of Minxing book, we get some really great insights into the making and development of Minnie the Minx from correspondences between the two. Now that Booster is well in hand, I would like you to try out another character. This time a little girl who should come pretty close to Booster in her outlook on life. We'll call her the Minx. Wow, now the real question is, who the hell is Booster? Mooneyboy would send more letters describing his approval for Baxendale's Minx and giving suggestions on art and even what hair color would be appropriate for a wicked young lady. I like your character, she will take a trick alright, and if the series goes to color, the open locks will get a splash of red. This is in keeping with the character and that old saying that you never know what a redhead will do. He's not wrong about redheads. Nuts. Baxendale, who had been modelling his Minx very much after David Law's Dennis, started to inject his own personality into the character, to the delight of Mooneyboy. Your ideas are still rather wild and with an element of slapstick, but I don't mind how many you shove into me. There is always something to be gained from them. Oh my goodness, this Mooney guy seems to be a really enthusiastic character. But what about Leo? What were his thoughts about creating the iconic Minx? In an interview with the Daily Telegraph newspaper, Leo Baxendale said the following: "Characters such as Minnie the Minx used violence but were not defined by it. I realized as I drew her adventures, what drove her was an intensity of will. This was an Amazonian warrior, a street fighter woman, but I never showed her hit another child. Where would be the comedy in that?" As we can see, Leo was very proud of the character. I do wonder though about that never hitting another child though. Are you sure? I've seen Minnie punch plenty of children, but perhaps in Leo's run, he really did never show her hit a child, which is an impressive amount of constraint. I doubt he did, but it would be big if true. Personally, I would have just had her battering everyone. In Minnie, 65 Years of Minxing, they talk about how Leo introduced more colloquial and natural sounding speech to Minnie. He had her talk more like how children of the day would have spoken. Mooneyboy was a big fan of this, once remarking in the office out loud, "This is what we like to see." Leo, who was in the room, walked over and was expecting the loudly spoken opinion to be about the drawings, and was surprised to see him pointing out the speech balloons he had written. What a weird man Mooney Boy was. Mooney Boy wasn't just Mr. Happy Pants about everything, however, and pushed back a little on Leo's goal of making Minnie a total female warrior. He didn't like the original shoulder straps, for example, which to be fair was a good call, as vertical black stripes over horizontal black stripes would just be a bit much. They decided that Minnie's main target for minxing would be brash bully boys, but let's be honest, it was just boys in general. Could you imagine the conniption weirdos on the internet would have if this Minnie was only just released today? They would be well mad on Reddit, and some BBBC or Channel 4 dickheads would moan and complain and would say a thing or two about a thing or two for a segment or two. Then just imagine all those weirdo internet opinions. Speaking of weirdo opinions on the internet, it's now time for mine as we look at the first comic of Minnie the Minx, Part 3. The Minx has arrived. After some teasing and previews in previous issues of a mysterious minx, it was now time to see the terror in action. Right away the art is beautiful, but it's not the Minnie look we all know. She has these long pigtails and her eyes are much smaller on a very round head. She also hasn't lost those straps just yet, and as for her personality, well, let's see for ourselves. Our first panel warns us about the minx. Imagine being so terrible your hometown had to erect a sign to warn all passerbyers of where you live. This sign though is immediately justified, however, as we see Minnie as badass as possible pushing some poor kid's head into the pavement with her foot. Her mom, annoyed with her ruffian daughter fighting, tells her to go play with this scrapbook. Minnie, the ever diligent daughter, does so and proceeds to run around the neighborhood, battering unsuspecting boys with the book and even using it to help encourage her hefty friend to lose some weight. The last panel shows a tatty looking Minnie bragging about how the book helped her win 9 scraps. Leo really did make Minnie a lethal warrior. A great first comic for the Minx. The character art, as is usual in these 50s Beanos, is superb, and Minnie is a very fun character, running around and beating the snot out of boys, but never using a fist. Leo Baxendale, he had morals. He would never ever have a child punch another child. Fat shaming, smacking them with books, and curve stomping their faces into the pavement, well, that's just all fair game. Baxendale continued to refine the art as he worked on the strip. Honestly, I think for the worst? Perhaps due to the suggestions from Mooney Boy, but I base that assertion on absolutely nothing. It all comes down to taste, and maybe you prefer this lankier Minnie with a much more detailed face and that classic British comic nose. You know the type. This one. Ugh, so British. I was a much bigger fan of her initial, more cartoony and simpler look. To me, it was a lot more fun. The new lankier model has its moments, such as this panel. We see Minnie pinning a rather tall man to the ground, again using her foot to force his face into the floor as she steals his roller skates. Again though, at least she never used fisticuffs. By the end of the 1950s, Minnie's look had been refined to what I think is a nice compromise, and is what her look would be for most of the next 50 years. She isn't as lanky, and the art has been made a little more cartoony and fun. She has also been promoted to the full page treatment and color, which of course meant some red. Her hair and face have been refined to what we all know, and her pigtails are now much shorter. Her dad is also refined and has his classic signature look as well, which is just perfect, and I'm sure they will never redesign him for no reason at all. I'm pretty sure this will be the way he'll look forever, and I won't ever have to get mad about it. What? Leo had perfected his minx in more ways than one, with one notable standout of the comics being how he did his title cards, making them more inventive and interesting looking. The master was on top of his game. The question now though is for how long would he stay at the top of his game drawing Minnie. Part 4, Leo leaves and Jim arrives. It's 1959 and Mooney Boy is out and new editor Harold Cramont is in. Harold has a problem, however. He knows he will soon need to find an artist to replace Leo Baxendale, Baxendale had become a victim of his own talent and success. He was responsible for all the big heavy hitters at the time. Little Plum, the Bastry Kids, and soon in 1960 he would also be responsible for the Three Bears. He also drew the Banana Bunch for the Beezer comic. Luckily, Hoot wasn't around to be remembered yet, or he would have probably had to draw some cuddle comics too. The years and deadlines had finally worn down the talented Leo, and in 1964 he finished working on the Beano, leaving behind in his wake a wonderful array of characters. If you have been following my channel for a while, you know it was the big fella, Davis Sutherland, who took over the Bastry Kids. But who would be put in charge and be able to handle our little minx? Enter Jim Petrie, who had some very big shoes to fill. Editor Harold knew it wouldn't be an easy task and gave Jim many mini test scenes to illustrate to help him learn how to draw the Baxendale style for the character. He also encouraged the budding cartoonist to fill in the blank spaces with his own zany humor, and then in 1961, the editor decided that Big Jim was ready to take over the mantle. Jim Petrie would go on to produce 2,000 weekly strips of the Minx, and when people picture Minnie, it is he's Minnie they probably are thinking about, much like how it was the big fella, Davis Sutherland's art that we picture when we think of the Bastry Kids. Jimmy worked with many staff over the next 40 years as he continued to draw the Minx, including notably with writers Al Bernard, who loved all action stories, and Craig Ferguson, who liked to use Minnie's pals more. It can't be understated the impact Jim Petrie had on the Beano and Minnie. 2,000 strips over 40 years is just nuts. Part 5. Tom Paterson. After 40 years of loyal service, Jim rode off into the sunset as stylish as he ever was and became a great ambassador for the Beano. He had not only filled Leo's shoes, but he actually outgrew them. So what is to be done when you need to replace him? You get the greatest British Beano artist of all time. That's what you do. It seems like a good idea, right? But was it? Introducing Tom Paterson, the genius artist behind Single Standy Uppy Socks, Brain Dwayne, Calamity James, the Numbskulls, and Viz comics such as Wee Raj Joe and Nash Gordon. He has also worked on the Buster School Bell. I knew the Norks were similar to those damn squelchy things. Sweeney Todd was another great comic, and if you were lucky enough to get those modern Buster specials, you got to see Sweeney Todd's art in full beautiful Tom Paterson glory. Never has ugly looked so pretty. This guy is the best, so that begs the question, why do I not like his Minnie the Minx? He made her too ugly, or at least his style was too ugly, and I think part of my distaste for his mini run was due to 40 years of her looking the Jimmy Petrie way. The idea behind choosing Tommy Boy was sound. He was a huge admirer of Leo Baxendale, and the influence is clear to see. Tom had still developed his own very distinct style, and his art was very expressive, often grotesquely so. His run on Minnie ended in 2008, long after I had stopped reading, but I do distinctly remember that shift in 2001 when suddenly I just stopped liking Minnie comics. Again, don't get me wrong, Tom in my opinion is the greatest British comic artist of all time. I just didn't enjoy his take on Minnie. It's interesting now looking back, however, on his mini run, and not even just his mini run, his other ones as well, like Calamity James. I'm no longer 11 and can actually appreciate just how beautiful his comics were in that ugly kind of way. I mean honestly though, look at some of these. This guy is next level. Not all his mini strips look this good of course, but he was generally very consistent in his work. I appreciate his mini comics as art in and of themselves, but they just don't seem very mini to me. He draws her so demonically ugly sometimes. She always looks so sweaty and gross, as does the dad. If you were to swap out Minnie for another character maybe, I probably would have enjoyed these comics a lot more. Enough complaining though, because if any artist deserves a full episode in the future, I think it would be Mr. Paterson, but it's time we moved on to his replacement for Minnie. Part 6. Ken Harrison. According to the Minnie 65 Years book, the Minx's popularity had flagged and slipped down the polls dramatically by early 2008. See, it wasn't just me not digging her anymore. To be fair, her declining popularity was probably also due to the fact she couldn't just waltz around and batter anyone she wanted anymore, just for the lulz, as well as the rise of video games and the internet stealing the attention of little brats. To try and help save her declining popularity, a dandy artist was selected by Ewan Kerr, who FYI is my favorite Beano editor whose name I can't pronounce, to come over to the Beano and save our little minx. I was long gone by this stage from reading the Beano, so it's interesting checking out what I missed, and I'll be honest, I don't think I missed very much here. I'm being mean, he does a good job, but again, I just don't like how he draws Minnie. Paterson kept the look, he just expressed it in his own particularly ugly way. This new artist Ken Harrison, most famous for drawing the iconic looking Desperate Dan, changes Minnie's look a little too much for my taste. I mean, she has everything she needs to look like Minnie, but her face is just off. Again, if I could put all the blame on Tom Paterson for a minute, he drew her face so incredibly expressive and cartoonish, it feels weird to go back to a much more subdued look. The art itself is still wonderful, and it's just her face that bugs me. I really don't like it. I am very pedantic and I don't like change, but luckily for me, Ken would only draw the strip until 2012. Part 7. Nigel Parkinson and Paul Palmer. Boy, it seems like I'm never happy, am I? Greatest British comic artist of all time? Nah. Legendary artist Ken Harris? Well, don't worry, gang, because I have a feeling that things are about to look up for old Minnie the Minx. Nigel Parkinson is here to save the day, along with Paul Palmer. Nigel first drew Minnie in 1997, ghosting for Big Jim Petrie for a number of issues. He would later do the same for Tom Paterson and Ken Harrison. 3 very different artists, and Nigel was able to fill in for all of them when required. Finally, those boffins in the Beano office had the great idea of, hey, why not just have him draw Minnie? That only took them long enough. Nigel modelled his Minnie off of late 1950 Leo Baxendale's run and used that to set the mood and feel for his Minx. I think Nigel gets the tone and art right. I don't find it as impressive looking as Tom Paterson, but I think he does a great job of making Minnie herself look appealing again, and it is a big step up from Ken Harrison. Nigel would share the penning of the Minx with Paul Palmer and continues to draw her in longer strips today, and when she often pops up in Dennis stories, as well as in specials and annuals too. It was also Nigel who had the honour of drawing Minnie the Minx for the first time on the cover of the Beano for her 60th anniversary. She would grace the front page many more times after this. Paul Palmer, a lifelong Beano fan, began work for DC Thomson in 1995, beginning with a Roger the Dodger comic. After ghosting for other strips, he would soon begin ghosting Minnie for Tom Paterson. Palmer also did a lot of work on the Summer Special, Fun Size Comics, and the Beano Annuals. He would go on to work on many of his own favourite strips, main eventers like the Three Bears, Biffo the Bear, and Les Pretend. He would eventually shadow for Nigel Parkinson before taking over in 2016 until he hung up his pencil in August 2018. Palmer's Minnie is very similar to Nigel, finally adding some consistency to her look. It's a bit more cartoony and simpler, but I think he keeps the overall vibe I like in my Minx comics. I think it is fair to say though that at this point in the history of the Beano, the art in general isn't as exquisite as it once was. Part 8. Laura Howel. So there we are, we have come to the current Minnie artist Laura Howel, who took over after the departure of Paul. Powell, ugh, what a ridiculous name. Powell, I can't even pronounce that, Powell. Laura became the first ever Beano female artist in 2007, so it feels apropos that she took over artist duty on such a historically significant female character like Minnie. Laura had got her Beano break inking the very cool Rat strip. Impressing the gaffers, she was commissioned for another strip titled Johnny Bean from Happy Bunny Green, which was a pretty bland Dennis the Menace wannabe, but allowed Laura to cut her teeth. She has worked on many other characters since, such as Tricky Dicky, Ivy the Terrible, Let's Pretend, and of course, Little Plum. Every Beano artist I talk about seems to have had worked on Little Plum at some stage. Anyways, art-wise she keeps very consistent to Paul and Nigel's look. Let's take a gander at her first test strip that convinced the Beano bosses she was the woman for the job. The story is your classic parent comes to school to talk about their day job and their kid is embarrassed. We of course first get an impossibly cool dad with a crazy job before Minnie's own dad pops in, to her chagrin. Notice how I am resisting complaining about his redesign. I have really matured. What I will complain about though is Minnie's dad having a name. Mr. Makepeace. Minnie's dad's name is Minnie's dad. It's a British thing. Why are these surnaming people? I swear to God, if his first name ends up being Paul, I am done. Anyways, Minnie cringes at her dad proudly proclaiming to be an accountant. A very respectable and well-paying job. The only way to stop the cringe is for Minnie to up the cringe by pretending her dad is really a secret agent. Minnie then, well, I can't say the word I want to say, so let's just refer to her sudden behavior as having an episode. And during this episode, she attacks everyone, assaults her teacher, and forces her dad to hide in a locker before being caught and given detention. The comic ends with a classic bad pun. There's no accounting for bad taste, I guess. What? Taste in what? In jobs? What is the joke here? Terrible pun aside, a fun comic that captures the tone of Minnie very well. Laura was a great choice as our current Minnie the Minx artist. Part 9, The Minx Club. Minnie has gone on to become one of the Beano's biggest icons, right up there with Dennis the Menace, the Bastry Kids, and of course the iconically iconic Even Stevens. Characters like Burl the Pearl and Pansy Potter came before the Minx and were certainly heavy inspirations, particularly Pansy, but they never had the staying power of our Minnie, who has been smashing gender stereotypes and just straight up smashing boys' faces into pavements for over 65 years. Minnie was accessible to boys and girls from the very beginning and maintained that appeal ever since. Could you say she is a feminist icon? Yeah, I don't see why not. Even Paul Gravett, author of great British comics, acknowledges her influence on women in the 1950s and 60s. As a figure of anarchy and individualism, Minnie did inspire many women. Feminists were given a lot of encouragement to be free of male subordination. Well, there you go. Minnie the Minx. More like Minnie the feminist icon, am I right? She was girl power years before girl power was cool, and she appealed to everyone. Minnie has also inspired countless children to try their hands at art, and many have gone on to become professionals, including her own current artist. Like Desperate Dan, she has also been immortalized in Dundee City Square with her own bronze statue, aiming to pelt Desperately Unfunny Dan in the back of his head with her slingshot. She was also meant to at one stage get her own TV series at one stage, being developed by Lime Pictures, but unfortunately this seems to have been very quietly dropped and there hasn't been any update in years. That's a real shame, but don't worry Minx Club, I'm sure we will see a lot more of Minnie Minxing over the next 65 years.